David here gave us the format, and he'll explain a little bit while I set up all these things. So please, David.
Okay, so it's going to be a little bit weird because of how the chairs are set up, but we're going to use what's called a fishbowl conversations, used at a lot of conferences, and it's pretty simple. A couple of rules. You can only talk if you're sitting up here, but anyone can come sit up here. So if you have something to say, this is your chance to have it. Or if you disagree with what someone's saying up here, come on down and shut them up, or have at it. The other rule is there can always and only be one open chair. So you don't get to walk up and say something controversial and then get up and run back to your seat. But it's a really nice way to, there's probably a lot of conversations that have been going on and you'll have something to say. So we're just going to start the conversation, but you guys can throw us out of the chairs anytime you want to, just by coming up and sitting down.
So explain how somebody comes and sits here.
Correct, because there has to and only be one open chair. If you came up and sat down, one of the three of us would be forced to get up and leave. Okay? Dude, anyone. Usually if someone's desperate, it's the first person to get up.
Or if you're finished saying what you've got to say.
Yeah.
Is the conversation focused on one topic, or can it just go wherever it goes?
He's going to do a presentation and then seed the conversation with an idea, and then it can go wherever.
Skip it.
And if you talk out there when you're not sitting up here, Robert's going to throw something at you. Okay.
Is it the back again?
I don't know if it's the Mac or the usability. Oh.
Maybe it's the user.
He says hiding his iPhone in his pocket. Anybody want to pair this with him?
What is he trying to do?
Ask him.
I'm curious.
It's very simple.
Yes, Robert had the same problem too.
I want to see him struggle. You learn by doing.
Okay, so here's my story first. I was part of the project where it started by doing analysis and some bunch of coding for a few years. Then we realized that the code is really bad, so we had to start fixing it. And then we realized that the analysis was not quite correct, so we had to remake the analysis. And then in the end we got back to remaking the business plan. So we went a little bit backwards from what you expect from a software project. So what we did in this case, we started to get really sensitive about, is this feature defined good enough to start developing it? Because if you are doing this, it's quite painful. So you start thinking, is this really good enough? So what we started to do is to define some risks for each feature. And by defining risk, we were actually asking some questions. How well do we know the feature? How well do we know the technology we are using? How well do we know the solution? And as you can see, what this actually means is that we were trying to learn the features. On the other hand, when we started to remake the business, the questions that we asked were, which are the customers, what do they want, how's the market, and so on. This meant learning the business. So this made me wonder at some point, maybe what we are trying to do when developing software is to learn something until we reach to a certain point where we can actually give it to the market. But then we haven't stopped learning because the user feedback will come and we'll learn some more and so on. So the question that I'm trying to ask here is, what changes would you expect if we think about software development and maybe agile into learning rather than developing? And here are a few things that we identified as agile practices that help learning. Pairing, working together, these are social environment things, continuous reevaluation, continuous feedback, setting objectives, and doing stuff together. So, the first question that I would like to ask to anyone in the room is to think back to the first agile project you were on and to think about what were the things that you learned in that project.
Should we have that be the first question for the fishbowl?
Yeah.
Okay. You're going to have your chair slide over in it? We should probably have like 5 chairs.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I will try to document what you are saying, so.
Okay, then we need one more brave person to come up here and be a fish.
Yeah.
Who wants to?
Or a shark.
Please.
Go ahead.
Anyone want to start?
I'll start. I'll be the first brave fish. So the thing I learned on my first Agile project was I walked in as a tester to this project who was doing extreme programming. One of the developers came up to me and said, "We're doing XP. We don't need testers. Why are you here?" So he was a little nicer than that, but basically that's what he said. So I took it as a challenge and learned everything that I could about testing on an Agile project and what it meant. And I accessed all kinds of resources, and that was probably my first real introduction into my passion, which has kind of driven my whole life. So what did I learn? It was very personal, but it gave me passion about what I do.
So again, we're having a conversation. You guys are listening. If you have something to say, come on up and sit down. One of us will shut up and walk away. I think if we switched to this idea of learning, we'd be forced to kind of have more discussions about like little small controlled failures. Because we're all scared, you know, the difference between adults and children. As children are happy. Like when I go to another country and I'm trying to speak the language, I walk up to the little kids because the little kids will just laugh right at you. You know, in China, language has tones, and if you say things wrong, you could be trying to ask for the toilet and end up saying, "Where's the truck chicken door?" And it's really hard to correct. And little kids will go, no, fourth tone. I think that's one of the things is that I learned, you know, to reframe failure.
I would say that we have already formatted, help us to have failures and to learn faster, like code retreats. And I don't know how many of you know about the code retreat format. Okay. For the others, we can share a little. So we take a problem, we go together somewhere outside, preferably outside the company, and we will work in pairs to solve the problem. But the idea is, if I'm not to solve the problem, but to exercise practices and to try new things, to learn from others, to fail in a controlled environment. So we repeatedly solve the problem many times during the day, like 6 times. We have 6 sessions. After each session, we will delete the code. So the important is not solving the problem, but learning, fast learning, and sharing our experience in the group.
I mean, is the difference between learning and failure the cost of the event?
I'm sorry?
Is the difference between learning and failure the cost of the event?
So in a code retreat, as such, if you do a day and kind of done it 6 times, what is it you're trying to learn? And your question is, how did you, like it cost a day for how many developers? And you weren't really failing as such, you're learning things, but there's a cost attributed to it as well.
Or even like the micro costs where you're sitting there, because the first time you pair with someone, especially if that person is better than you, the cost of failure is pretty little if your ego is low. You know, if you build it yourself, you can look stupid really fast, or you can look at pairing, it's like, I get to steal all of dude's best ideas, you know, like, as fast as I can. Share is a better word than steal. Borrow. Remember, this is your opportunity to come on up and talk about, like, where does learning stuff happens? I think that's the difficult piece, is that learning happens in little bits and we miss it.
You mentioned children before, and I use my grandchildren now to learn from. How do they learn? I think if we can adapt our learning to how they learn, and forget that ego stuff, it goes a long ways.
The ego stuff is.
It's
I'm not an agile master, but I'm trying to introduce agile stuff, principles in the way I'm doing business. And the lesson I've learned is when I was in San Francisco, I realized I'm very extremely slow. Okay. So, for example, I was in a project and we was working together for 9 months and didn't get any result. And when I was in San Francisco, those guys there said like, okay, until this kind of result you have right now, you should spend usually like 3 weeks. So we spent like 9 months. So from the cost perspective, it's a huge impact. Our life, we spend nine months from our lives doing some shiznit, which is like in can be done like in 3 weeks. So right now what I'm doing is I'm creating only those kind of projects that it's 1 week.
So is the learning then in a situation where you're dropped into a space where everything's accelerated? I was listening to Robert talk thinking, man, I live in slow motion compared to that dude.
Yeah, that's my lesson learned. So I wasn't, and from my point of view, one year ago, I was pretty sure I'm the fastest people around here.
That was Robert's cue to walk up and sit down, but he didn't pick up on that. So
That's a challenge.
I thought that was pretty clear.
Do I have to say something right as I get up here?
No.
Okay. Well, no, but I will add to that. I mean, in terms of... I had asked.
That was right. It's a rhetorical question, wasn't it?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. Because I don't talk at all. No, so... Talking about, I guess, when do you learn or having time to learn also, is one of the reasons that I love the software craftsmanship movement also, because it's all about, it's really giving people the time to learn, how do we really develop software. And so you have, I think what Maria was talking about, the code retreats, things of this nature, because typically on projects, you're not given the time to learn new stuff. Or if you're working in an extremely fast-paced environment, you better learn, pretty damn quick. But all this other stuff that's kind of growing up around the software craftsmanship movement, I think it's really cool because it does, like Maria was saying, give you a safe environment to be like, okay, so I can throw away my code, and that's okay. So, and then you learn to do that really quickly. So then when you get on a project, you could say, just develop something really quick, scrap it, and then your manager, I guess, really won't know different. Because you're used to
back out there, dude. Like, remember the first time someone said, let's throw that away? I mean, that's, people always say, well, I don't want to pair, and I always say to them, so what are you going to replace that with? A code review? You bang code for a week, and I look at your code and I say, boy, Robert, all that code sucks, let's delete it. You don't go, oh, cool, Dave, thanks for telling me. It's like you're less fearful to kind of delete something because you have safety in a set of feedback from tests. And we're working in smaller bits, and we're sitting next to each other, and it's not about you and I, it's about the thing we're building.
I mean, but I find it interesting that it's, as developers, you got to go even outside of the business environment to feel safe enough to do that. I mean, I don't know, for me, with my own company, it's a bit different because I'm definitely not risk averse, right? And I mean, you make calculated risk. You say, okay, well, I might lose some hours and I'm paying someone for some hours, but the end benefit that I get out of someone trying something, even if you scrap it, is still going to be much better.
Yeah, so here's a weird idea. I don't know if this fits in the lean startup space, but when I do fixed bid work for my company, I charge people for a certain amount to do a chartering session and build a product roadmap for them. And then it's a pay-as-you-go iteration plan. So any iteration they don't like, they can fire me. And I leave them with a code base. It's a working code base. And, knock on wood, I haven't had one of those projects go bad because clients are blown away by the offer. And if you look at it from a profit structure, across time, it's you're figuring out what you don't know in your bid. Assume your bid is wrong. Assume you're going to get burned. What is your best defense? Learning early, figuring out what you don't know, not waiting to negotiate, because then it gets worse and worse. And so much trust is built in those early iterations. My former business partners freaked out on that because they were like, we can't do that. And I said, based on what? And there was like no evidence. Based on you're scared? Okay, dude, if you said, I'm scared, that would be an honest statement. But we can't do that. We can't jump off the building and survive. But we can do that. Well, you might be able to do it. I don't know, does Red Bull make you bounce? It gives you wings.
It gives you wings. Yeah, so you don't have to worry about bouncing. Take it again.
Okay, so you guys are going to have to either start asking controversial questions or get up here and share some of your experiences. Please do.
I have one question to follow with this discussion. What if instead of measuring the velocity of development, we would rather measure the velocity of learning inside the project?
Yeah, how do we do that? How do we know when a business is learning? Because we know when they're not learning. It's called bankruptcy. Or you run out of your venture money.
I guess the important thing is to have results at the end, to have happy users. So velocity of learning, it's mostly for you as a developer. But I don't see any benefit for the users. So at the end, you should have in mind we are as an entrepreneur or in a startup, probably solve problem for others. So yeah, I guess the first indicator should be like how fast and how better I solve this problem for them. So the second part is how good, how fast you learn those kind of stuff.
There is much rejoicing.
Yes.
Hi to everybody. First of all, I want to tell you a little bit about me. I came to this conference because I was very interested in seeing how software people think about Agile and how they apply Agile in everyday life, let's say. I felt a little bit like an outsider. I come from a different area. It's hardware design, so we are somehow complementary to each other. In hardware, Agile is not really applied at the moment. And recently, I just finished my PhD thesis, and I dealt with comparing traditional project management methods with the Agile method here, and see if they can fit into microelectronics hardware design, let's say. And I can tell you one of my most important findings is that both approaches, the traditional and the agile one, are kind of extreme. They tend to be too much. I think it should be somewhere in between the two. For example, like Vlad said, no? Vlad, he said, I used to work on a project for 9 months, and then I discovered that somebody told me that I should have finished it in 3 weeks, and now everything I'm doing in a 1 week time frame. Yeah, I try to.
I have a long vision, of course. I have a long vision, but I'm doing small projects. I split the project in very small stuff to have like 1 week iterations. So it's much better because I can learn every week. For example, I didn't do some stuff. For example, in my personal life, I'll give an example for my personal life. I put this week to have 8 hours of tango and 2 hours of meditation. At the end of the week, I did 6 hours of tango and no meditation. And yesterday I was thinking, what is the problem? Why I didn't meditation? Why I didn't complete the tango lessons? Yeah. So I've learned something from this. At 1 week duration, I've learned that I don't like meditation. I have to push me to do this. It's not like default stuff, you know. In tango, it was much more easy. So I did 6 hours. And right now, next week, I will put only 20 minutes meditation. Yeah, not 4 hours.
Or you can meditate while you're doing the tango.
So this is the process I want to implement. It's not like I plan to do meditation. I plan to do tango, but I plan to learn much more faster.
But what I meant was that it's not important how long is this iteration, because it seemed to me that everybody seems to be proud if the iteration is smaller and smaller all the time. Usually good things come in time. So we should not be afraid to do an iteration which is 3 months long or 3 weeks long or a month long. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's not good.
And it's for someone that's kind of new to the community, it's a real astute observation. Because when people are excited about how short the iteration is, they're going to suffer in the Dude's Law equation. Because it's like, look at how short this iteration is. So what? You know, is that helpful? If it's helpful because you're trying to discover a lot, that's really valuable. So one of my clients, or a group I work with, is Medtronic, and they have hardware, software, and firmware. And what's very interesting is that the software group is often frustrated because the firmware group made a decision about when they should take the data from analog to digital, because that way they could store more data. But the software group is saying, if you would have given us smaller sets of analog, more rich data without digitizing it, we could have made better decisions for the physicians. And so after they figured out how to do incremental development with software, they started exposing that upstream is where the next bottleneck is. And I also work with companies that do really complex hardware things. One of them built a earthquake simulator and a building stabilizer that stops the Citibank building in New York from swaying. And there's a lot of constraints. And so to say, you should have a 1 week iteration, I think is goofy to that hardware group. But to say, don't worry about getting feedback, just go build stuff and someone will be okay with it, is, you know, not living, that's like living a lie in the 21st century. I think that the Agile stuff used to be weird and unique, and now it's a solution for the rate of change that exists in the world. So, because I used to be a freak, I'm still kind of a freak, but I used to be someone that was asking people to do new things, and now I feel like I'm giving people solutions to existing problems, which is really interesting to me.
Yeah, one more thing I wanted to say with it. It's about the red line. We do a lot of iteration in everything we do, but the danger is that we could deviate from the right track. And one of my conclusions was that, especially when we use agile principles in developing whatever we develop, is to have a red line to guide us all the way. And this is what some of us call vision, some others call the goal, and I would call project success criteria. Really something more vague, I would say.
Same abstract.
Yes, more or less, yes. So let's.
I have a story. I think we shouldn't obsess too much about the iterational plan. So there was this one guy posting a question on the Scrum mailing list. I think it was like, we have an existing project, we're starting doing Scrum, we are using a 2-week iteration, but at the end of the 2 weeks we don't get anything done. So I think we should make that iteration 4 weeks. What do you think? And then there was Ron Jeffries who said, well, I think you should make it shorter. Make your iteration 2-day iteration, because that way you will understand what your problems are. So actually, iterating is only a mechanism for understanding what your problems are. That's it.
Right on. Yeah, and to add to the whole how long your iteration should be or whatnot. Yeah, so it's really whatever it needs to be based on your context, which is such a consultant answer. It's not even funny. But what I mean by that is, so for instance, like we do 1-week iterations, but that's because the rate of change in our environment is we have to be able to rapidly take in feedback and move really quickly. But that's software. And so I think in some ways software, especially web-based applications, we have it lucky, like compared to hardware. Because if I make something, I can just change it and deploy it like that and I'm done. Very simple. So when working with customers, I always base it off of, well, let's maybe try like a 2-week just to see what happens. If it doesn't work, start changing things. So yeah, it could be weeks, months, but ultimately it depends on, like Rob was saying, right? Your ultimate measure of success really as a business, are you learning? Are you really giving your customers what it is they want as efficiently as possible? So yeah, like you were saying too, right? So you iterate to make sure that you're doing that and you're keeping up with them at their own pace. And with that, I'm going to hand the mic to you, and I hope that someone else comes to grab my seat.
What I'm going to tell you, it comes from my experience as a startup person. So right now in startups, we don't even have iterations anymore. We are actually continuously deploying. So we can have iteration like, we are always on iteration. So we get some really good feedback, and I always give this example of Apple. Apple is a hardware company, but they learn to do crazy stuff inside their company. Actually, Apple is one of the companies in the world with the most secrecy. And in the very rare occasions, every couple of years when they let someone in, they show some amazing facilities. They can iterate designs, hardware designs, a couple of times a day. I mean, that's absolutely amazing. It's unheard until now. And
that's really cool what you said, though, because you said constraints are how you learn.
Yeah.
And that's very different than what I think most people look at it as like, oh, what will we do? Instead of, I don't know, we'll figure something out.
Yeah. Actually, startups are the most amazing constraint-wise business because we have no money. We have the biggest constraint of them all. We have absolutely no money, but we need to create something amazing. And that's actually the most awesome challenge in the world. Create something from nothing.
Although astronauts have no oxygen. That is true.
Yeah. Oh.
It struck me, and I'm going to take it back to learning, because we've been talking about learning here a lot and the constraints. One of the other things that I missed the first time, but you wrote up there, and then I heard it several other times, is safety. So you have to be in a safe environment. The constraints force you to innovate, but there's also your own personal space. So what's safe for me might not be safe for David, or might not be safe for somebody else. And I think there's a lot of really important things about learning that all comes together.
Yeah, and there's that notion of like early on, everyone's just thrown into pairing sessions, and if you pair with a jerk, you don't learn. You don't fun. Yeah, you learn it's a jerk. Really fast. Yeah. I guess you do learn.
And you do, and I worked on with companies that have hardware, firmware, and software as well, and you learn. The first time we tried to put a software, out there, and the firmware guy says, whoa, we're not ready.
Yeah.
And you go, okay, what do you need from us? What can you give us? And you learn, and so we learned to work with the firmware guys, and so the software had iterations of 2 weeks. The firmware guy, he got to 2 weeks, but it took him a little while longer. And then we had to work with the hardware people. So their iterations were a little bit longer, and we learned to do drops. The hardware would give us a drop every 2 months. And the firmware guy could work with that, and then we could add on to that. So if you don't learn, you never change. One of my most hated sayings is when I hear somebody say, well, we've always done it that way, I go, yeah, so there's something there. What can we do? What can we change?
I should just say, John, that didn't work out well for General Motors.
Exactly.
I don't know. I'd love to find out how they do more stuff inside Apple, but I think there's like Apple ninjas, and if you find it out, because I heard they told the people that were building this, they didn't tell them they were making a phone, which is interesting because it doesn't feel like a phone. And it was the first one of these things I held in my hand that didn't feel like a phone. In fact, like I said yesterday, it's kind of a crappy phone, and I still really like it. So, I met someone out in San Francisco last time I was out there who worked for Steve. And I said, well, tell me about it. And dude, it's like he's in a guild, it's like, no. And first rule about Apple, no one talks about Apple. Fight Club or something.
So if you want, we are almost done with the time, so if you want to add anything in closing, now time.
Tell us what you're learning about now.
One of the reasons I wanted to come to this company today.
I don't know. No, not today. I mean, what are some of the things you are interested in?
We've been talking about in The Black Swan. The author talks about this idea called epistemic humility or epistemic arrogance. And epistemic arrogance is the difference between what you know and what you think you know, which is a pretty tough test, And I think what I thought I knew was a lot about design. And in the last year, I've learned that I don't know that much about design because I've got to work with some great designers. And it's like it's more than just how the code's structured. And it's, I think, more ambiguous than how the code's structured. And those people are real craftsmen.
I'm not sure. That's another really interesting question. What I've been playing with lately in my last couple of blogs have been about learning, which is, to me, this is just such an interesting subject. So that's because I've been doing a lot of training, and what I find is not everybody learns the same way. So you have to present things in different mechanisms. You have to think about how they're perceiving what's safe for them. So it's a huge thing, and that's kind of what's intriguing me these days.
One thing about learning, I'm really fascinated about this book called The Outliers. I think that right now in Romania we are the outliers because the outlier speaks about various opportunities happening for people around the time when, let's say, I give you an example for Silicon Valley. So the people who created the most important businesses in Silicon Valley were born in the pretty much same place in a period of 2 years. And I think we in Romania right now have the same issue because we were taught in school that mistake is bad and making mistakes is really bad, and that we are inferior to other people, and always was this culture, this pressure on us that we are inferior. And this actually created some really positive energy in some people that really want to move above the threshold, to actually be better. And that's what I think makes a difference for us. We want to succeed maybe more than populations that succeeded traditionally, that were great in the first place. So that I think it's an outlier story for Romania, that we are really hungry to succeed. Learn, constant learning. When you are told that you are worse, you want to be better, and that's what drives us at the moment.
Passion.
Yeah, big passion.
Thank you all for this conversation. We are out of time. I think that it would have lasted another 2 hours if we continue. But we are out of time. There's a coffee break right now, so thank you.